12 years ago at this time, I was released from federal prison and I was driving to the halfway house in Hollywood, California with my family. Had about 6 hours to get to the halfway house from prison, and the whole world seemed somewhat different. Not that different. I was only away a year, but different in that I was wondering if all of the promises, the work that I had done on the inside, if it would immediately pay off. So I was always sort of obsessed on the inside with what that transition would be like to the other side. And I want to share some takeaways with all of you because I think the takeaways I'll share with you will help you get on better track both before sentencing and, of course, while in custody, because I want your release to be smooth and easier than it should be. In my case, I felt in those early days that the time inside was kind of like practice. It's one thing to write about ethics and philosophy and doing the right thing and overcoming struggle and adversity and building lessons, or as articulated in Lessons from Prison, I felt like the time away was a sabbatical to prepare for richer experiences upon my release. It's one thing to write it. It's another thing to live it as you're back in the frenetic pace. So the first takeaway in those early days, I think, was it was just practice in prison. Uh, my judgment, my success would be contingent on what I did moving forward. Game day is the day of your release. And I was both terrified at that thought, but also very excited at the same time because I was a convicted felon looking to rebuild in the Great Depression, a recession, which it was in 2009. So that's one of the first takeaways. It feels very real, and things that you write on the inside, the challenge is following through on them once you hit society. The second takeaway: people are fascinated by federal prison. Absolutely fascinated. Everywhere I went, every time I ran into someone, when my pass is in the halfway house, what is prison like? And is it true like what I see on prison is like television? And do you mind if I ask you? And of course, in my life, because I'd been so open about it and written so extensively about it, I was very comfortable discussing it. I encouraged people to ask questions about the experience, and I saw that as an opportunity to debunk what people thought about life on the inside, but also as an opportunity to begin sharing the content that I had created while in custody with Michael Santos. And that's a great takeaway for all of you. When you come home, people are going to ask you myriad questions about the experience. You could run and pretend it didn't happen or say it was boring. I watch a lot of TV. That's one way. Or you can say, I learned from the experience. It made me better. It made me stronger. And there are a lot of hidden lessons that I look forward to sharing with others publicly or privately within the family. So when people immerse you in questions to the point of exhaustion, you're like, my goodness, this is all people are curious and want to talk about is my time in custody. I want you to respond appropriately. And I think the content you create or the record you build will, of course, make your transition easier as you come to your own game day after you're released from prison. It's more than just talking about it. It's nice to be able to show them content, as I may have done through Lessons from Prison or your own journal or a blog. So people will be consumed with it. Talk about it. Talk proudly about what you did. That was a great takeaway for me, and it led to very fascinating and engaging discussions. Another takeaway, something I found a bit of an inconvenience: there are some weird people out there that love throwing out prison jokes, okay? And it didn't bother me so much. When you go through the criminal justice system, your skin, you get conditioned, right? So once you've stood for count and been indicted and been separated from your family, you really develop a thick skin. So I'm not saying it bothered me, though I found it so odd and weird at how many people continually, still to this day, make prison jokes about rape and dropping the soap. If you're one of those people, I think you're weird. If you dislike this video, that's cool. I think you're odd. You have some strange fascination with prison, but I still get it to this day. And when I hear it, the first thing I think to myself, forgive me for judging, but it is my YouTube channel, I think, that dude is weird. So I still get a lot of the odd, weird prison jokes all these years later. Now, there's an interesting disconnect, another takeaway. So while initially they're utterly fascinated with prison and what you did and what it's like, once you're home and you've adjusted, let me tell you what happens. People move past it. Then they're like, nobody really cares anymore. Nobody cares that you're home because you've covered the release and life in prison. And then it comes down to, so what do you do now? Great, you're home. We've covered prison. You're safe. You're on the other side. What do you do now to support yourself or sustain a family or grow a business? What are you doing? So again, I hearken back to what you'll do in custody. Your transition will be harder if you release and you don't have a job lined up. My release, and a great takeaway for all of you, create that job from prison. I wrote employers. I wrote my probation officer from custody. So while I said earlier that my time in custody was practice and real life was game day, by practicing deliberately and thoroughly on the inside, I was better equipped to perform on game day. So a takeaway for all of you: in time, people aren't going to care that you're home. They're going to get back to their lives. People are busy. They're then going to say, so what do you do now? Use that time in custody to build that business, to create a job. If not, you're going to be like a lot of the dudes in the halfway house, lamenting taking the halfway house, regretting that they didn't use their time in custody more productively. So within that first week, it was significant that I had a job lined up, that I was able to articulate and share what I learned while in custody, that I felt ready and stronger and better than had I not prepared. Another takeaway for me, even in the measly year that I served in custody, was developing a sense of perspective in a way that I never had. Before I went to prison, I tended to obsess about everything that I had lost. And it kept me up at night. It kept me up in those early days of prison because I just begged and wished for a do-over. We can't go back. We can't change what we've done. We can work to create a better record. We can demonstrate what we've learned. But regardless of how hard we try, we can't change what happened. So I used to obsess until I met Michael Santos with the fallout and the damage that I had done. And in time, through prison, learning from people like Michael and long-term prisoners who had endured worse than I ever will have endured in a minimum security camp for a year, I developed a sense of perspective and gratitude. And rather than obsess about everything I had lost, I began to appreciate what I had left. So I know all of you, you have your own journey, your own struggle while traversing the system. Those early takeaways when you come home, despite the filth of the halfway house and perhaps getting a job that is beneath your skill set and still being sickened by those DOJ press releases, a great takeaway for me, and I hope it's a takeaway for all of you. And the reason you're watching this video, focus on what you have left. Focus on what remains. And if you can do that, the experience is going to be easier on the other side. In the video I filmed on April 28th last month about my 13-year surrender to federal prison, I referenced and read from a book that I absolutely loved called A Runner's High. And I finished the book, and I'm actually going to read, as I wrap up this video, key takeaways from those early days upon my release from federal prison. I want to read something from this book. And when you hear the word running, you could essentially put the word prison into it. But as you hear it, I want you to think about this. On page 242 of this phenomenal book called A Runner's High, Dean writes, "Running is not about racing or winning. It is about the human challenge and the exploration of self. Running is a conversation, an education, a revolution, an awakening." Well, you can just put prison there. Prison is a conversation, an education, a revolution, an awakening. I hope that's the case for you. I hope you see it as an opportunity to awaken yourself and to educate yourself and develop a sense of perspective and gratitude that you might not have felt previously. We discover who we are through the movement of our bodies, and there are lessons to be learned in running alone, much as there are in running larger races. But in the end, the experience is about you and the trail. We are not the sum of our achievements, but an ongoing story that continues to be told with each day, with each step. Older, wiser, and stronger in many ways, I've learned to love the good races and the bad ones. For now, I see that it is not the medals or the buckles that matter, but the fact that you are still showing up, still moving forward, still putting in the effort, still doing your best. In the end, that is what makes the difference. That you stayed the course, that you remain true to the person you are, that you did your best. You can insert the word prison for every time you just heard the word run or running, and I hope that's something you're able to do in custody. Because if you're able to be productive and build through the good and bad days, through the days where you think nobody cares and nobody's listening and the future seems so bleak, your release will be much easier. I tended to obsess about everything I had to do while in custody. And in my early release from prison, I didn't totally overcome that. I remember that first or second day at the halfway house, thinking about everything that I had to do, thinking about my reputation and my career and dealing with a probation officer and getting my job approved. And I was 34 when I came home. How am I going to meet a woman someday and tell her that I got to prison? And how am I going to pay this $500,000 in restitution off? I was so overwhelmed that I struggled in those early days to gain real traction. And even in the halfway house in those early days, I found myself retreating to the quiet room and the the halfway house. And I spent a lot of days, reading and writing, kind of like I did in prison, but practice time was over. It was game day. And I had to transition from reading alone and thinking alone and writing alone or alongside Michael to becoming more active. But I struggled at first because I was so overwhelmed. So a takeaway for all of you, you will feel overwhelmed when you come home. I don't care if you're gone for 3 months or 3 years, you're going to feel overwhelmed with everything you have to do because in a way you're going to feel forgotten. Life will have moved on and you want to play catch up. So what I began to do well was I began to break things down day by day. It's a key takeaway for all of you. Rather than obsess about the money and the business and getting off probation and the job, think about what's the next right thing that you can do. When I began to do that, I became much more productive and I got on track and the job got approved and I got my passes in the halfway house. I began to build this business. I found a writing schedule that aligned with now being back in the community. So I want you to be aware of that. Very easy to be overwhelmed when you come home as I was. I lost some days because of it. Break it down literally the next 15 minutes or next hour and you'll be more on track. And the final takeaway, as crazy as this sounds, and perhaps you have to experience time in federal prison, there are some things about it I missed. There were some things in those early days I missed. The ability to sit in a quiet room for 12 or 13 hours and think, or sit in a library for 10 hours and just read, to be able to exercise for 6 hours a day or run that track, to learn from people with whom you may never associate or see again, to understand what real struggle is, not for me, but for others, and how they're able to overcome it. It is truly a time to introspect and to think. So it sounds crazy, but in those early days, there were a lot of things I missed. And I probably missed working alongside my business partner, Michael Santos, more than anything. And I'm happy that I was able to see him earlier today as we continue our work 13 years later, 12 years later. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found value in some of the takeaways and in those early days from my release from prison. And I'm going to read from a second book. And the last thing that I'll say is I wrote in Lessons from Prison, if you're still with me. I wrote, yes, I would encounter struggles. So what? Struggles I had come to accept were part of life. The answers were not to be found through double cheeseburgers and online chess. I can never allow adversity to cripple me, no matter how bad the pain. I had to persevere. Before I went to prison, I behaved like a fool, and I was ashamed. And I knew when I came home, struggles would continue, and they did, and they have. That's just life. But I strive. I try to respond to them more favorably, differently, and to live authentically. And to fulfill the obligation, promise I made to my family, and is articulated in this book. 12 years. Just such a It's just such an incredible journey, and I'll never forget it. And I'm sorry to get a little emotional, but I'll never forget it. And I hope none of you forget what's possible before prison, while in custody, and of course, when you come home. So thank you for watching this video. I look forward to returning soon. Document your journey, create that content, make your family proud, and create a legacy you can defend to those that love and support you. Thank you so much. Goodbye.